Shalom and welcome back to the Rashi Nosh. I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Kara.
This week, our Torah portion is Pinchas, a wonderful Torah portion. In English, we would call this man that it's named after Phineas. And it's an incredible story. It's one of my favorite portions in the Torah. But we're looking particularly at a section this week in our Rashi Torah discussion commentary from the JPS at a section on page 140 called Going the Extra Mile. So let's look at this, and as always, we'll have some discussion questions. In accordance with God's instructions, Moses passes the mantle of leadership to Joshua in full view of the entire nation. As described in the following verse, he laid his hands upon him, Moses laid his hands upon Joshua, and commissioned him as the Lord had spoken through Moses. This is in Numbers 27:23. Rashi notes a discrepancy between what Moses has been commanded to do, and what he actually does. So he laid his hands generously over and above what he had been commanded. For the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, lay your hand, but he did it with both his hands. He, Moses, fashioned him like a vessel filled to overflowing, filling him generously with his wisdom. This is so interesting. Going the extra mile. If you're required to do something, go above and beyond. Rashi explains that although Moses is commanded to only lay one hand on Joshua, Moses lays both hands on him. This act reflects Moses' desire to prepare Joshua for his new leadership role to the maximum extent possible. Moses' dedication to Joshua's success is all the more impressive given that God rejected Moses' request to have his own sons succeed him as leader. So, in our discussion questions, as Rashi describes, Moses exerted himself to assure that Joshua would be optimally prepared to lead the Jewish nation. Can you describe an instance where a leader wholly groomed a successor and to successfully assume the mantle of leadership? And what characteristics and actions of leadership helped make this possible? The most obvious example to me in this in my own life is my father preparing me to replace him as pastor. Now, that was my desire to follow in his footsteps, but it was not guaranteed in our particular church. We are a part of a particular denomination where we are assigned to the church where we serve. We can't just say, because your father was the pastor, you can just follow him in leadership. It doesn't work that way. Now, I'm so glad that our denomination saw fit to allow me to be assigned to the same church so that I could follow my father. But he really allowed me to have a very long on-ramp, so to speak, of pastoral leadership, allowed me to preach on Sunday mornings for years, involved me in leadership planning and casting a vision for the church, even allowing me to make some choices in some of the directions that the church would go, even before I assumed that leadership role and the denomination assigned me here. So I really think there's a wonderful example that I have in my own life of my father sort of slowly fading into the background and then allowing me to come to the foreground. And so seeing that and him not only instilling within me in an intentional way some of these leadership characteristics and actions, but just sort of by modeling that, I think that has been very helpful. And if you've listened to me for any length of time, whether in the Kosher Pastor courses, in the Pearls of the Torah, in these lessons for the Rashi Nosh, any of my teachings for any of the Jewish holidays or anything, you hear me say often, my dad has always said, and I'll quote him a lot. And it's because he's been such an example of leadership. I can say that because my father is a pastor, I've never attended a church where the pastor wasn't my father. I've never attended a church where I had a different pastor. So I have been watching his leadership my whole life. And so I think that has been an interesting transition because he's still on staff at our church. Technically, he's now my associate pastor. And that is interesting because since he led our church for 32 years as the senior pastor, we've now, coming up in just a couple of months, we'll celebrate 5 years as being in senior leadership at our church. But throughout those 5 years, there will be people that are just accustomed to coming to him with an idea or a concern or a suggestion or a question. And over the last 5 years, he's had to keep saying, I'm not the pastor. I'm not the senior pastor anymore. You need to go talk to Pastor Matt. And I really think that that leadership being modeled for me, and then him also now sort of funneling people our way to field these questions and concerns and ideas, I think has really helped us to be in a position where we are the real leaders of the organization.
Yeah. And I think with the whole concept of going the extra mile, like knowing you had been in ministry at this church for a long time, he could have just said, just your day's coming, wait, just your day's coming, wait. And then just kind of said, all right, now it's your turn, but because he laid out that long kind of overlap transition, it not only, made it easier for you to come in, but it also allowed the people to see you in that light and not just as the pastor's kid. You were also in leadership in a way that allowed them to transition to look at you in that way as well. I can't think of in my life a specific example for the positive like that, but I can think of a negative a situation when I was working at an ice cream shop decorating cakes, and the store manager up and gave her 2 weeks notice, I think, maybe 3 week notice, I'm not sure. And so the owners came to me and asked me if I wanted to be the store manager. And of course that was just very out of the blue, but through a number of conversations and circumstances, I decided to do it. And even though there was time to train me up, the lady that was training me, supposed to be training me, that was taking over her job, she kind of had the attitude like she just didn't want to help me. And so she did the bare minimum to kind of show me. So then I was kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit. She walked out and I was having to figure everything out by myself. The current workers were all like looking at me like I'd taken this lady's job, which wasn't the case, And so it was really hard for me to jump into that leadership role in the beginning because it was not the same situation.
She didn't set you up for success.
She did not set me up for success. No, she definitely did not care and just wanted to, get by on the bare minimum, just said, see, it's your problem.
Right.
And it was a struggle. It was a struggle.
One thing that we have learned in ministry is that every situation is an example to you. Sometimes it's a good example, and sometimes it's a bad example.
Yes.
And I think yes, and we need both of those, to be honest. We need both good examples to follow and bad examples to say, well, we don't want to do it that way. And I am grateful that I've had a good example of succession, and I tried to model that for a couple of decades. I led worship at our church and really felt that the more I was doing of preaching, it was not beneficial or advantageous to me in my preaching to have to lead worship and do the sermon. It was too much. And so for me to be able to slowly raise up my cousin Alex, that now leads worship full time at our church. If you remember, at first he would only lead like the closing song, the more worshipful set of music at the end of our service, and he did that for a number of years, and then slowly but surely took over everything. And I'll never forget this idea of the passing of the mantle. We did that. I did a commissioning where I put my talit around him, and just like Elijah and Elisha, and said, I'm commissioning you and you're taking over for me, and I'm passing the torch and the mantle. And it was a very meaningful thing. Don't be afraid to have someone succeed you. It doesn't mean that you're done with ministry, and it doesn't mean that you failed, and it doesn't mean that you're all washed up. But if we don't allow, especially the younger generation, to come up and succeed us, if we don't time that right, then we'll be too old to train them, and I think this is just a good practice. And this is not just in business and not just in ministry. This is just discipleship. We need to be raising up the next leaders and thinking ahead, thinking forward, and not trying to do everything ourselves. I think this perfectly dovetails into where we were last week as well. So you take the mantle of leadership that you have, and you begin to sort of set up the next generation to be in leadership, because that's what the Lord wants us to do. It must continue. The kingdom must go on. The gospel must advance. So I pray that you will have the right wisdom and how to do that and when to do that, and that the Lord will give you the tools that you need. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Rashi Nosh. We'll see you next time. Shalom.